Remember when assets for the remake were leaked and everybody was laughing at Square Enix because they kept squawking about spoilers? Be careful of spoilers! Please don't spoil it for people! How do you spoil a game that's been out for over 20 years? I'm not your remake. Oh. So the big twist of the game is that this might not be so much of a remake as it is a sequel. In an Ultimania book interview, Tetsuya Nomura, bless his convoluted heart, was quoted as calling the remake the 5th installment of the compilation of Final Fantasy VII, preceded by Advent Children, Before Crisis, Crisis Core, and Dirge of Cerberus. For all the good that tells me, now that I've finished gushing about the game, I kind of want to talk about some of the things I didn't like so much, and that all has to do with the ending. And I want to talk about it because I strongly feel that they dropped the ball a little bit when it comes to new players. And I want to talk about how the ending landed for someone like me who was kind of apathetic to the original game. I never finished it. I never played the spin-offs. I didn't watch the movie. And I played it with my partner who's completely new to Final Fantasy. So how did it land for someone like us? And I want to preface this by reiterating that I loved the remake. I loved it. I loved it. I have mostly good things to say it. I feel like I need to say that. It's just, don't come at me. I love the game too. I just have some criticisms and things that I think that they could have done a little bit better. So let's talk about the changes, starting with the Deus Ex Dementors.
Oh, great! These assholes again!
Also known as the Arbiters of Fate. These dudes were the first big change in the game. They first showed up when Cloud meets Aerith for the first time, and from there they kind of show up every time a pivotal plot point happens. Before knowing what they were, I found them annoying and distracting because they just felt like Deus Ex Machinas. Like everything they were doing was something that could have easily happened without them swooshing about and taking up the whole screen, and we know that it could have happened because we've already seen it happen in the original game without them. So I just thought they were pretty annoying, and they kind of broke my immersion every time that they showed up. Toward the end of the game, however, you come to find out that these are basically the Keepers of Fate, Keepers of Destiny, whatever you want to call them. They're working free for the live stream, and their job is basically to make sure that nobody screws anything up. Enter the big plot twist of the game. This isn't really a remake, it's more of a sequel or alternate timeline or time travel-y, who's it, what's it, I don't know. Jury is out. At the end of the game, you basically murder them dead, so that means that all bets are off for the rest of the series. We don't really know what's going to happen next. In a way, the Arbiters of Fate almost represent an overprotective fan base. A fan base that only wants you to do this remake if you do it beat for beat, exactly like the original game. You can only do this if you include the ATB battle system, and everything has to be exactly the same. We want the dialogue the same, names the same, scenes the same, everything the same, just with prettier graphics. The thing is, unlike a lot of remakes and remasters that bring in another studio to do these sorts of things, this is actually being done by the original creators of the game, and something like what fans were asking for would be really boring for creative people like that to make. That's not really their forte. They do storytelling. That's what they do. They don't want to just come in and dress up something that they've already done before. They want to try new stuff.
What will we find on the other side?
Freedom. Boundless, terrifying freedom.
They probably had a lot of cool ideas that they never really got to do, either because of budget constraints or time constraints or just creative constraints. I know that when I'm writing a story, usually when I get to a fork in the path in the storytelling, I have 2 or 3 different paths that I can take the story in, and I'm never really sure which is the best path to take. Sometimes I'm really torn between 2. I really like this path, but it might be a little bit risky. Maybe I'll go... Side note, if you want to see a really cool movie that incorporates the forking plot dilemma writers face, check out Hush. It's on Netflix. So on the one hand, it's cool for them to be able to revisit the story and be able to explore and try out things that they never got to do, or try new things or do whatever, but that's really hard with a game like Final Fantasy VII, who has a fan base a lot like the Star Wars fan base, honestly, and we all know what happens in the Star Wars world if you get too excited. It's got to be terrifying to approach something like this as a creative, and I really appreciate the way that they did it. And it's kind of shady that one of the final bosses in the game ends up being something that kind of represents the fan base.
Them again!
I like it, Square Enix. And from a storytelling perspective, it's really cool that they're doing this in a way that does not erase or diminish the original game.
If we succeed, if we win, we'll be changing ourselves.
By making this more of an alternate reality or more of a sequel, they're not erasing any of the original scenes that you really loved before. The original game is still there if you want to enjoy the original game. It hasn't changed, and it's not changing in the final lore of the game. This is just adding on to it, expanding upon it. When you look at it a certain way, it almost makes like the chapter selection at the end of the game, the New Game Plus, that's kind of part of the lore too. They're making exploring new ideas and doing different things part of the story. This is something they've been experimenting with already in one of their other games, Final Fantasy XIV, their MMORPG. And that game, pretty much everything they do is based around the lore, whether it's a new battle mechanic or new, I don't know, sometimes even just a stupid UI thing. It is part of the lore. For goodness sake, Final Fantasy XIV was a disaster when it launched. They destroyed the whole game and relaunched it, rebuilt it from the ground up, and made it part of the story. So this isn't something that Square Enix is new to, and I'm glad that they're continuing to do it and continuing to get better and better at it. So while I didn't like the Arbiters of Fate at first, they were annoying, broke my immersion, ultimately, by the end of the game, I really liked it and I was really impressed with what they did there. I thought that it was really clever. Now they've accomplished the impossible. They're still remaking the game. We'll still probably see all of the big iconic moments that we're expecting from Final Fantasy VII, but we have no idea how we're going to get there, if things are going to play out the same way. Now we have something to speculate about. Theory crafting can open up. There's water cooler talk. I mean, how often does a remake come along that you can do that with? Now there's more hype for the sequel rather than just, oh, I can't wait to see Costa del Sol, that'll be cool. There's a lot of debate right now about Aerith's death in particular. Is she going to die the same way? Will she not die? Will it be somebody else that dies? Maybe she'll survive but come back a little bit later. Our uncertainty with Aerith is kind of reflected in what happened with Avalanche in this game. They died swiftly and unceremoniously in the original, but here we have Jessie, who died pretty much the same way that she died in the original. We have Biggs, who ended up surviving in the end, and then we have Wedge, who also survived but possibly ended up dying later anyway.
Just tell me that I made a difference.
Now I want to talk about one of the biggest problems that I have with this game, and that is the Sephiroth Problem. When writing the original game, Yoshinori Kitase, I'm sorry if I completely butchered that name, said that his writing of the character was influenced by Jaws. They kept him in the shadows. You never really saw Sephiroth. You heard offhanded comments about him, maybe a little bit in the background, but mostly you just saw the carcasses that he left behind. And it worked. Sephiroth was terrifying in the original game. One of my favorite scenes was when you wake up from your cell to find all of the people who'd locked you up murdered and bloody. You follow this grotesque trail of blood to the peak of Shinra to find President Shinra, who up until then you'd assumed was the main villain of the game, and there he is, dead in his chair. And it looks like it happened quick too. He was still in his chair, hadn't moved. Somebody came at him from behind, and he had no time to react, was just slumped over. Shortly after in the game, you're blocked off from an area by this massive serpent that basically one-shots you if you try to cross. When you finally find a way through, you find the carcass of the snake that had blocked your path all this time, crucified in your way. Not only did he dispatch all of these guys that have whooped your ass up until now, but he got ahead of you with the body of this giant snake in time to crucify it and pin it up and display it for all of the world to see, just to gloat. And you never even see him. That, my friends, is how you make horror. Now contrast that with the image of Sephiroth that most people have now. I feel like as time went on and they made more spin-offs and they made their movies and all of that, the character got diluted somewhere. He became this watered down, kind of typical androgynous anime villain. Now that's just my impression as a casual observer, but I feel like a lot of that came out in the remake. Sephiroth just wasn't very exciting here. He showed up early and he showed up often. There was no real reason to be scared of him. He just showed up to mock Cloud, I guess. And there are lore reasons for that, I understand. As you go back and play the game again after getting to the ending and understanding what the Arbiters of Fate are, it becomes obvious that Aerith and Sephiroth are aware of what's going on to a certain degree, and they're kind of competing with each other to manipulate the timeline. So I don't know if maybe this is an absolutely positively necessary change they had to make for wherever they're going with this to work, but I can't help but feel that they blew their load a little too early here with Sephiroth. I mean, it felt so wrong to be fighting him already at the end of Midgar, to already hear One-Winged Angel, and you haven't really developed any of that dread for Sephiroth. You don't really even know who he is. As I mentioned earlier, my partner watched my playthrough, and he didn't really have any idea who Sephiroth was. His eyes just kind of glazed over as the whole ending sequence happened, and you know, they don't really develop who Sephiroth is. You don't know what his intentions are. They kind of shoehorn it in, I guess, as, oh, I guess he's trying to bring a meteor down. Like, it's, I don't know. I feel like it assumes that you know way more than you probably do. Katase even mentioned this when explaining why Sephiroth was brought in earlier. He said that everyone probably already knows who he is, so the way they did it before wouldn't really work. I think this is a mistake and a missed opportunity, because there are a lot of people coming to this for the first time, and there's a lot of people like me coming to it that didn't really care for the original or didn't really explore the original too much, and you know, I don't really know all of the intricate details. Then you get to the final shot of the game, and it's the ghost of Zack maybe picking up Cloud and taking him into Midgar. I guess this means Zack's alive now, or maybe they've produced an alternate timeline where Zack is alive. I don't know what all of that was supposed to mean, but mostly I was racking my brain trying to remember who Zack even was. I was like, oh, yeah, that's Zack, but who was Zack again? And that's my perspective of someone that's sort of played the original game. For my partner, who was new to Final Fantasy, he was just like, who dat? I mean, why should we care about this black-haired looking Cloud that's, who is this? So I don't know, I've been reading a lot of forums and other people's thoughts, and mostly from people who are established fans of the game, and even they're confused. So if they're confused, imagine what a new player is thinking with all of this whispers and ghosts of fate and Zack and Sephiroth's stuff. Like, it doesn't really make sense. Overall, I think that they really nailed this remake when it came to fleshing out the original scenes and building up the world and the people and the characters. They absolutely nailed it. But once they veered off in the end to this crazy supernatural kind of Kingdom Heartsy territory, I know that Tetsuya Nomura did not write this game, he was only the director, but it did feel very convoluted Kingdom Heartsy. Ultimately, it reminded me of Game of Thrones. You know, Game of Thrones was the best in the first few seasons when they were focusing on the characters. They stayed very grounded. It was focused on the politics and the world and all of those little itty-bitty kind of slice of life things. And as the series went on and went kind of crazy, zombie apocalyptic-y, it just lost its footing. And I feel like that's the same thing that happened here. I can understand why purists are frustrated because, you know, no one really asked for this, but at the same time, I applaud the creators for finding a way to flex their creative muscles and do it within the lore of the story and not diminish or erase the original game in any way. So that's really cool. I'm very impressed with that. But I'm sad that it came at the cost of cheapening Sephiroth and probably overwhelming and confusing new players. My hope is now that they've established that all bets are off for the following games, we've killed the Arbiters of Fate, I hope they don't show back up again. They can do whatever they want from here on out. I hope that they tone it down for the following game with the crazy supernatural stuff. I don't think there's really any saving what they've done with Sephiroth here. It's already cheapened. They're assuming now that we're already scared of Sephiroth, so I guess we just have to pretend to be scared of Sephiroth and just go with where it goes. But what about you? I'm really curious what you thought about the ending if you finished it now. I hope you have. If you've watched this whole video, let me know in the comments below what you thought of the ending. Are you cool with what they did with Sephiroth? Did you like the Arbiters of Fate? Are you excited for the next game? Let me know what you think, and I will catch you next time. Thanks for watching.